Welcome everyone to the NCAA Division I Committee on Infractions press call. All participants are currently in listen mode only. After speakers provide their remarks, we will move into a Q&A portion of the call. Now I will turn the call over to Matt Mykert, NCAA Managing Director for the Office of the Committees on Infractions. Matt.
Thank you. Welcome to today's press call to discuss the NCAA Division I Committee on Infractions panel's decision regarding Auburn University. As a member of the media, you should have received a link to both the press release and the public decision, which contains the details of this case. This information can also be found at ncaa.org. The Committee on Infractions is a group comprised of representatives from across the NCAA membership and the public who are separate from NCAA National Office staff. The members of the Committee on Infractions who reviewed this case include Carol Cartwright, President Emerita at Bowling Green and Kent State, Rich Enzer, Commissioner of the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference, Jason Leonard, Executive Director of Athletics Compliance at Oklahoma, Stephen Madba, Attorney in Private Practice, Vince Nicastro, Chief Hearing Officer for the panel and Deputy Commissioner and Chief Operating Officer at the Big East Conference, Jill Redmond, Executive Senior Associate Commissioner at the Atlantic 10 Conference, and Shankar Suryanarayan, University Counsel at Princeton. Vince Nicastro will now discuss the panel's findings and decisions. Following his opening comments, he will take questions.
Thank you, Matt. I think all of you now have access to the decision itself, but I'll provide a brief overview of the decision and then be happy to answer any questions anyone may have. The Committee on Infractions decision details the findings and penalties in this case involving Auburn University men's basketball. Our comments today are designed to address your questions. However, please note the decision stands on its own merits. The violations in this case center on a former Auburn associate head men's basketball coach abusing his position of trust for his own personal gain by accepting approximately $91,500 in bribes to steer student athletes toward a financial advisor. The conduct at issue in this case was related to a broader scheme that involved money and influence at the intersection of college and professional basketball. The scheme resulted in the arrest and prosecution of multiple individuals, including college basketball coaches, on conspiracy and bribery charges, and it led to significant and various NCAA reforms. Today's decision marks the final case that has gone through the peer review infractions process related to that scheme. The former associate head coach in this case was arrested in September 2017 and later pled guilty to accepting bribes to steer college athletes toward a financial advisor's services. The associate head coach's actions violated NCAA ethical conduct rules. The committee was particularly troubled by the response of those he introduced to the advisor and his representatives over the course of the 3 meetings that he arranged. The student athletes and their families expressed unease and discomfort during and after those meetings. The former associate head coach also committed other violations in this case. In total, he provided more than $10,000 in impermissible benefits and cash payments to 2 student athletes and their families, resulting in those student athletes competing while ineligible. He also violated ethical conduct rules when he did not meet his obligation to participate in the investigation. During the investigation, the enforcement staff also uncovered another potential violation in which a former assistant coach allegedly paid the tuition for a walk-on student athlete who believed he was on full scholarship. While the committee could not ultimately conclude the violation relating to the tuition payments actually occurred, it determined the former assistant coach did not meet his obligations to fully cooperate in the investigation. Lastly, the committee determined that the Auburn men's basketball head coach violated head coach responsibility rules because he did not adequately monitor the associate head coach and failed to promote an atmosphere of compliance. In concluding this violation, the committee specifically noted the multiple examples in which basketball staff members did not report potential violations to the head coach or the compliance staff. Head coaches are responsible for the violations committed by their staff, and the head coach was unable to rebut this presumed responsibility. The committee reviewed the full case record and determined the violations were level 1 aggravated for the former associate head coach, level 1 aggravated for the school, level 1 mitigated for the former assistant coach, level 1 mitigated for the head coach. The committee accepted all of Auburn's self-imposed penalties, including a postseason ban for the 2021 basketball season. The committee specifically noted Auburn's decision to self-impose the ban prior to the beginning of last season as being meaningful. The committee also prescribed additional penalties, which are detailed in the decision. This concludes my opening remarks. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Megan, could you please explain to reporters how to ask a question?
Yes, thanks, Matt and Vince. If you would like to ask a question, please use the raise hand function at the bottom of the screen. Again, if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand at the bottom of the screen. Our first question will come from Pat Forty. Please unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, thank you, Megan. Vince, my question, with the Condoleezza Rice Commission in 2018 proposing up to 5-year postseason bans and a near unanimous call for heightened sanctions, I'm wondering how the committee squares that with a 1-year postseason ban that is at the very lowest end of level 1 aggravated spectrum.
Yeah, Pat, thanks for that question. And, what I can say there is that, there are a number of these cases that have been resolved, a number that are in a different process, pending resolution, and they're all very different. I've had the opportunity to work on a few of these cases, and again, at face value, they may seem to have similar fact patterns, but each of them are very distinctive, have different sets of evidence and very nuanced. And in this case, based on all the evidence that the panel reviewed, which was significant, we just felt it was in our judgment that the penalties that we prescribed were appropriate, or the penalties that were self-imposed were acceptable to us.
Our next question comes from Mike DeCourcy. Mike, please go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, I'm wondering, as a member of the Infractions Committee, how the Infractions Committee continues to justify the use of scholarship sanctions as a penalty, given the nature of these particular offenses, none of which were student oriented, and as a matter of fact were student offensive, so to speak, given what's alleged to have occurred with Coach Person. So can you explain how that continued process of using the scholarship sanction serves any purpose whatsoever in what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It's a great question. Obviously, it's a penalty that has been used in a very standard way across cases like this and other similar cases for a long time. And that is a penalty that has been provided to the committee by the membership as one of those that could be meaningful in helping to provide appropriate consequences for schools that are rules violators. My sense is that you're talking about impacting students that really had nothing to do with the actual violations. But again, it's just one of the tools in the toolbox that the membership has provided the committee and has been used, obviously, a fair amount over the years.
Our next question comes from Joseph Goodman. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, hi, Vince. Thanks for doing this. I was wondering if you could kind of speak to the length of time of the investigation, why it took so long, and also maybe some insight into the NCAA's, I guess, future processes and maybe how to speed things up.
Yeah, that's probably above my pay grade, Joe. I can speak to this case in particular. These cases take a little longer than people think they should. And I think part of that is the thoroughness of the investigation, the due process rights that are provided to the schools who want to make sure that they have every ability to make sure that their case is heard. And I do think that the pandemic had a little bit of an impact on this particular case and other cases that have been in process over the last 18 or 19 months.
Our next question comes from Billy Witz. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Vince. Just a couple things is was Bruce Pearl's track record of being sanctioned at 2 other places, was that at all factored in with his penalty? And also on the item about the former assistant coach who is accused of, or about the tuition and the walk-on, can you give a time frame for when that occurred?
So the first part of your question, Billy, the panel did take into consideration the previous show cause, and that is cited as an aggravating factor and was factored into the penalty for Coach Pearl. The second part, I don't have at my fingertips, so perhaps someone from the media relations staff can provide the actual time frame. I believe it's in the decision, but I don't have that at my fingertips.
Our next question comes from Nathan King. Nathan, please go ahead.
Hey Vince, I know in the language it says that the first meeting was in December of 2018 and then the next one January of 17, and that those 2 student athletes, while they competed after that, they were ineligible. And at the bottom, it says that those wins would be vacated from when they were ineligible. I was just wondering if you guys had the exact dates of those, just as we're trying to pinpoint the games in question there.
Yeah, I may have to refer you back to the NSA staff for the specifics there, Nathan. Generally, the principle is if they competed while they were technically ineligible, then those games, if those records will be vacated. But I think the staff might be able to provide more exact information for you there.
And our next question comes from Mark Murphy. Mark, please go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to ask, did the committee find any competitive advantage for Auburn in these violations with Chuck Person? And do the committee believe that Bruce Pearl actually knew what Chuck Person was doing? Thanks.
Yeah, so I think anytime there are significant violations like this, there are some inherent competitive advantages. And I think that's the framework for the infractions process, to try to create as level a playing field as possible. But also note that there were additional violations above and beyond Chuck Person's violations relating to the the FBI investigation. So whenever you have, again, impermissible benefits or other recruiting type violations, I think there are some inherent advantages there, and that's why we have an enforcement and infractions process.
Our next question will come from Michael Gittens. Please go ahead.
You guys have listed that there's going to be a $5,000 fine plus a 3% of the men's basketball program budget. Can you clarify what calendar year that 3% applies to?
That's a good question. I think it's the current year, but we work, the NSA staff will work with the school on determining the exact amount based on the information that they exchange.
One more time, if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. Okay, Matt, at this time, there are no further questions in the queue.
Right. Thank you, Megan. Thank you all for joining us today. This concludes our comments. A recording of the press conference will be made available on ncaa.org. Thank you.